Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Podcraft. This is the show all about podcasting, from launching your show to monetization and everything in between. I'm Colin Gray from thepodcasthost.com, joined in the car this week by Matthew.
Yeah, I know. It's one of these, like, we're going to talk about podcast intros and how you really need to get into the content. But I feel we can't not talk about, like, where we are and why. So talk us through where we are right now, Colin.
We're, we should have parked on the other side because right now we're looking at the road. But right behind us is a beautiful view over
Loch Leven.
Loch Leven, yeah, with loads of birds and other wildlife. So yeah, it's very nice.
Yeah,
blue sky day.
There's a wee castle on the island in Loch Leven where Mary Queen of Scots hid out back in the day. I think that girl was always on the run, hiding from people, and that was one of the many places she hid.
That's it.
So,
the reasoning behind this is that I was passing. I had to pass something to Matthew anyway, an old laptop that's going to use for testing. We thought, why not try and record in person for a change?
Yeah.
And also we get to test out these. What are we recording on, Matthew?
The Rode wireless micros. Good wee run out for those as well. Just going straight into the voice memo app in the old telephone.
Yes.
So great to get together and do some recording. And on this episode, we want to talk a bit about podcast intros, how to open an episode. We've talked about this a few times in the past, how each episode is a certain listener's first impression of your show. Yeah. And it's important not to talk too much about things like Mary Queen of Scots and bird sanctuaries and get straight into the content, isn't it? So looking back to our podcast discovery survey that we did a couple of months ago, there was a decent chunk of listeners, I think it was 17%, said that they would only give you up to 5 minutes to hook them when they were testing out your show for the first time. So as much as in the world of audio, I think we've got more time than video creators.
Yeah,
we're still on a timer, aren't we? We still need to be signposting what the show's all about.
Yeah, it's worth saying that it's a balance though, isn't it? Because a lot of the power of podcasting is the personality, it's the people, it's the, for better or worse, it's the humans behind it. And so getting rid of all of the chat, all the banter, is probably too sanitizing. But it's just being conscious of the fact that you don't want to go too deep on that, isn't it? And spend far too long on that. So a couple of minutes maybe is okay. Like you said here, 5 minutes people give you to hook them. And actually the survey also showed, don't have the data in front of me right now, but it also showed like there's a decent proportion of people give you like a whole episode.
Yeah,
or a couple of episodes even, don't they? So
40, I've got here 40% give you less than 50 minutes, but that's a long time.
Yeah. But with that aside, it still is like key to really try and give that hook right at the start. I often think sometimes you give the hook and then you can have a wee bit of banter. So at least you've got the hook that actually tells people what's coming up, and then you can have a little catch up and then get into the content. Maybe that's a better order.
Yeah.
But anyway, intros, you've got a structure here. Let's get into it. What are we going to talk about through intros then?
So I was thinking, we could give some practical tips for how to optimise your episode intros and make sure that you're signposting all your content and keeping the listener listening. But interestingly, Katie, our colleague Katie, had recently published an article where she actually analysed the top 20 shows in Apple Podcasts, and she was looking in particular at their intros, what they did that was the same, what they did that was different. So she was just looking for some patterns there. The first one of which, of the thing that she noticed, was only 7 of the top 20 podcasts had intros of more than 30 seconds. So a decent chunk of them just been very quick there, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and does that mean then like straight into the content, or is that just the sort of podcast intro? Like, what do you mean by that 30 seconds?
Yeah, that's them just getting straight into whatever it is, like an interview or the topic or that. So yeah, very quick, I am such and such, this is the such and such show, let's get into it.
Yeah.
And that'll include, I think she'd said pretty much all of them had some sort of little jingle as part of it. So anything on that sort of wee list of Katie's findings that jumped out to you at all?
Yeah, like you said, 6 of top 20 only had a 3-second jingle. That's crazy, actually, that just have the welcome to whatever it is show sentence. Like so little. It's good. It's cool to note, though, that she noticed that the distinct jingle, like there was a jingle in every podcast in the chart, even though those that had no intro. So at least people are still going for like audio branding, at least. Like you want to get that in there. So it makes it memorable, makes it recognizable. That's really cool. Yeah.
When I launched the Tabletop Miniature Hobby podcast, I used to just cut straight in, like there was no music or that. And I figured, like, that's fine, I'm getting to the content quicker.
Yeah.
And I actually got feedback from, like, more than a couple of people who were like, could you put some music at the start? And to me, I was like, but why? Like, do you not? But I did, and people seem to like it's only like 5 seconds, but for some reason, people just like that sort of thing. It's just extra polish, maybe, or extra immediate recognition if you're in a playlist.
Yeah.
So
one thing that was surprising actually was the fact that she spotted that there was so much promo going on in those intros in the top 20. So like shows that included, sponsorship ads, third party brand deals, whatever it might be. 15 to 30 seconds or so. But it's sometimes going against the grain, like trying to put an ad slot in that early because you haven't really given any value, puts people off potentially. But then again, it's quite valuable too because you can almost be guaranteed as a sponsor your slot will be heard at least, isn't it? So it's, I don't know, there's a bit of a balance there too.
Yeah, I think these podcasters, when they were doing the third party stuff, that was on the shorter side, like 15 to 30 seconds. I mean, we talked last week about pre-rolls and the pros and cons of those. But they were in their intros getting into maybe promoting, I've got this webinar coming up, and they might spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about that. Again, obviously, it could be working for them, but that probably is something that we don't want to learn. There's a lot we could learn from the top shows, but that's probably not one of them. Like that, you spend too long maybe promoting something right up front and taking loads of time.
There's a bit of those shows have become top through a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of practice, and they've potentially earned a bit more leeway, haven't they, to be able to get away with that. Whereas in our stage, our indie stage, most of us out there we're still earning that potentially.
Yeah.
You can't quite get away with it quite as easily. Yeah.
She noticed that the show Morbid, which I'm sure it's a true crime show, that was the only podcast that really took its time. I think the presenter maybe talks for 5 to 10 minutes about off-topic stuff, maybe about their life or whatever. Yeah. And she said that she had a quick peek on the reviews, and a lot of the reviews were calling that out. But I bet it's one of them, though, that like there are a core of fans that really turn up for that.
Yeah.
So it will be this tightrope of the host probably just made peace with it. I'm not going to please everyone, and I like doing this, and these people like me doing it, so I'm just going to keep doing it.
It's that old adage, like if nobody's hating you, then nobody's loving you.
Yeah.
So get negative feedback is often, I mean, not always, but can be actually an indicator that you're doing something right because you're being a little bit polarizing, which means that you're excluding some people, but it means you're bringing other people in much more strongly. So it depends, doesn't it? Yeah. It's funny that the data around the length of show was good as well, eh? Like the fact that didn't impact the length of the intro.
Yeah. Aye. So like there were some really short episodes, weren't there? Like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, but they both had intros of like a minute.
Yeah.
So it wasn't proportionally squashed down in the intro. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Whereas I would have thought like you're doing a 5-minute show, a 10-minute show, even just 20 minutes. You want to keep your intro. You want to make sure you don't have time for 10 minutes of banter.
Yeah.
In a 20-minute.
Yeah.
Certainly.
She talked about the longest shows in the chat, longest episodes. That would be so Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan, 2 to 3 hour long episodes. She says they didn't really have any intro. They just got straight into the content.
Do you know what? There's a bit of I noticed this just this week, actually. In fact, one of the hosts talked about it on his show. Do you know Chris Williamson at all?
Heard the name.
Modern Wisdom Show. I listen to it every now and again just to keep up with what he's sort of just different sort of top interviewers' tactics and stuff. He gets on some good guests, but he's doing really well on YouTube, up to about 3 million subscribers. So no Joe Rogan by any means, but like same kind of trajectory potentially. And he has taken out his intros. So he used to do a 1 minute, 2 minute, like post-recorded intro.
Yeah.
It says, this week I'm speaking to blah, 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 and here's a bit about him. And then you do a bit of music, and then you're into the actual recording. But he's removed that. And he mentioned on a recent episode, the reason for that is because it makes their YouTube publishing workflow easier. So it means they don't have to, like YouTube doesn't take that. Like you can't put on a pre-recorded intro because it doesn't have a bit of video. The music doesn't have a bit of video.
Yeah.
So it just made it much easier for their production to just go straight into the interview. So that's one interesting sort of trend there where people are, because YouTube is so important to those bigger podcasters. So again, this is just the top 20 really.
Yeah.
They've got the team to sustain it. YouTube's one of their big channels. So actually intros are kind of suffering almost. Or maybe not suffering because he's going straight into the content. So that could be a good thing. Yeah. But I just thought that was an interesting trend.
So I guess moving on then from what we might take or not take from the big shows to what the listener could think about in terms of their own podcast intros.
Yep.
The starting point here really is thinking about their audience. But before we jump into that, I feel it's maybe a good idea to mention again our survey that we're running with that teaser in hand. So we launched this podcast listener survey just last week there. So I've seen there's been a handful of responses, which is really cool. But we're very keen to get your feedback on the show, the things that you turn up for, the things that you like, the things that you maybe feel we could improve on. So thepodcasthost.com/survey is where you could take it. It just takes a couple of minutes and it's very multiple choice. So you could just bang through it very quickly, and there'll be a wee prize draw as well, won't there?
Yeah, we'd love to get people in for this because it just really helps us to improve the show. We want to make it more what you want to hear out there, more of the right topics, more of the right formats, more of the right, just the things you want to hear, the things you like about the show, and change anything you don't particularly like as well. So let us know. We'd love to hear your brutal, honest, candid feedback to help us do better. So yeah, that's over at thepodcasthost.com/survey. And we did say, Matthew, didn't we? We said we'd come back and see how well this CTA performs after, what was it, 4 weeks, 6 weeks?
Yeah.
What the responses are like as they come in?
I think we've had 5 so far. So it'd be good to treble that before next week. I'm going to be ambitious about this.
Yeah. Well, this was our guess, wasn't it? This is our kind of hunch around podcast CTAs is often the first week you don't get a load because it's just kind of bedding in. But then weeks 2, 3, 4, you're starting to repeat it. It starts to get in people's brains and hopefully they start to take action on it. So yeah, we'll let you know what the trend's like.
So back to intros then. Like I said, our starting point here is the audience. So Colin, this is a bit like if the listener, if it's a person picking up a book or switching on a TV show. So there are a few questions sort of subconsciously running through their head, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, first of all, is this interesting? Is this actually going to teach me anything? But there's also stuff like, does it sound well made? So like your quality in the first minute or two can make a big difference as well. Because again, it's like first impressions. There's the confusion aspect. Do I know what's going on? Like, do I actually have a clue what they're going to be talking about, what the benefit is for me? And that's the most important part really, is what's in it for me, isn't it? Like, folk are selfish.
Yeah. and that sounds negative, but it's not. Like we all turn up to something with some sort of benefit in mind for ourselves, don't we? But that's not to say we're being really selfish about it. But yeah, you need to sell a benefit up front to the listener.
Yeah. So try and get around any confusion. Just make sure everything's really clear and make it super clear what they're going to get from investing an hour of their time into listening to your stuff. Yeah. So what do you reckon? What's the kind of key components of what you include in an intro?
It sounds like a no-brainer, but a name, like even if it's not your real name, you maybe have a pseudonym or a nickname or whatever. But I think you need to put a name at the voice, don't you?
Yeah.
Like if you were just speaking every week and nobody actually knew what you were called, that would be a bit strange. So that's a no-brainer. And another no-brainer here, isn't that the name of the podcast?
Yeah, totally. I still hear podcasts like often these days that don't mention the name of the podcast in the first 2 minutes. I think it's because you assume, like you've been doing it for a year, 2 years even, or even only 10 episodes, that people know what they've signed up for, and it's almost repetition. But they don't. Like, people might have a big playlist, They might have a big list of things they're listening to. They've got 20, 30 shows they listen to. So just hammering that home and making sure they know where they got this value from actually is not trivial. Like, get that done. Yeah. What else, Matthew?
You want to get something in there around who the podcast's for. So, like, we'll mention it, or you'll mention at the start of Podcraft, like, this is the show about, planning, launching, monetization. So straight away, you want the listener to think, okay, well, I'm interested in that, or not. If somehow they've downloaded a podcast that's not relevant to them, then it benefits everyone for them to just move on straight away, doesn't it?
So. Yeah, definitely. It's that connecting with them. It's they want to think within the first 10, 20 seconds, they want to think, oh yeah, that's me. Like that actually describes my situation or the things that I'm interested in. And then, going on from that to the themes, which is not only what the show's about, which you've just kind of covered, but what problems does, this podcast solve? Like, again, benefits. What is it going to solve? What's it going to help them with? What about, like, there's the balance between the podcast and the episode, though, Matthew, isn't there? Like, you want to be able to describe this stuff for the podcast, as in who generally is this podcast for, and what problems does it solve as a whole? But then moving on to episode quickly, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you're getting really specific about what really does this episode dig into? What niche of the larger podcast topic does this episode dig into? And really what individual, particularly within your audience, this helps out on this one.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the main theme here, like Podcraft, okay, we're going to help you launch a show, we're going to help you grow it. That's the big picture.
Yeah.
But on this episode, we're going to help you choose a USB mic. We're going to help you get into Spotify and Apple. Like, that's the topic of the episode.
Yeah. So we normally serve any podcaster really that wants to run a successful show. But in this episode particularly, it's a beginner podcaster who's struggling with their gear decisions, stuff like that. Yeah. Do you ever include stuff about the format?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually. No. So, like, as much as this maybe is, I don't know if it's even considered a good practice, it's an option, Maybe you're saying, conversations every week with experts in this particular field, or, a podcast where each week I document my own experiences. So that's kind of format, but maybe I wouldn't say that's essential. It's an option. What about cold opens, Colin? You're a big Netflix fan. What's your opinion on cold opens and TV and podcasting?
I love-hate relationship with them. I think sometimes they kind of verge into the clickbaity side of things. So it's like, it's almost over-dramatizing. It's almost like a bit of kind of... it's a bit of too much, just too dramatic. But then again, if they're done well, I think actually they do work really nicely. Like if you do pick out a couple of good questions that you asked the guest that really teases the value that's coming up, or you tease a couple of really good sentences related by the guest that gives people a really good value right up front, then, if you're doing it that way, I think it can work really nicely. The other part so that's part of the love. It can work really nicely. The hate is partly the over dramatics that happen in them, but also the fact that it takes ages to do it.
Yeah.
It's actually a really big job. So I've spent a bit of time making cold opens for YouTube videos, for podcast episodes, and I just gave up because it just makes it, it doubles the time of the editing, at least, I think. So you have to either have a team that can help you with it, or you have the time and the resource to really spend a good bit of time on it yourself. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking there, like, well, I guess first and foremost, just in case anyone doesn't know what a cold open is, it's basically just a small chunk of your content stuck in the very front. So it's the very first thing you hear. So like, you put Breaking Bad on and you get like a big action scene, and then, I've eaten a whole bowl of popcorn, and then the intro credits start. So that's a cold open. But yeah, I'm thinking to myself there, is this something that you could build into your recording process? And again, it's maybe adding something more to the cognitive load of recording. Yeah. But like if you're talking to somebody, maybe they're giving an answer, and if you're maybe switched on or organised enough, you might say this is going to make a great cold open. I don't know. Maybe that's a wee bit too much.
No, it's something I do sometimes. Yeah, I'll have a piece of paper and a pencil beside me, and I'll try and note down, as we're doing more clips as well, like trying to do more short clips and pull out good takeaways and stuff like that to use on video. I've started to note down things that way. Just all I do is note down the time code, actually, and nothing else really. Maybe an initial, maybe like H for highlight, but with a cold open you can do the same thing. So if you think there's just a sentence, like a really impactful, it's the same thing really. Like something that's going to work for a clip is something that's going to work for a cold open, because it's really just anything impactful, emotional, curiosity inducing, anything like that. So They can work really nicely, yeah. And having that kind of noting method works nicely. I mean, this is one thing that AI can be very good for as well. Like if you get your transcript from the episode, pop it into something like Claude or ChatGPT, give it some good detailed instructions about the kind of thing you're looking for. Like search out anything that's particularly educational, particularly pithy. Like I want, anytime there's like 2 or 3 sentences that gives a really good self-contained nugget of information, something actionable, anything like that. Like you can use kind of little prompts like that to really pull out these sentences. And because it's a transcript, as long as you upload the SRT version of the transcript that has the time codes in it, you can get ChatGPT or Claude or whatever to give you that time code. It makes it really easy to go in there and find it, pull it out, and then turn that into the cold open.
What about pre-recorded intros? Like if there are certain things I want in my intro every week, could I just record a minute-long intro and just bang that on at the start of every episode? Like, is that a good option?
I think they're fine. I think they work okay as long as you put a bit of work into them. As long as you make it, like that bit I say at the start of lots of Podcraft episodes, like this is the show for anyone wanting to launch, monetize, grow your podcast. Like that could be over the music. It's just 1 or 2 sentences that just hits home the benefit you're going to get every single time. And as long as it's just really short, like 10, 20 seconds, I think they can work fine. Yeah, totally. I do like to do it custom because it kind of ties into the intro.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of our routine for getting into an episode.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take long. And we're practiced enough that we can do it like kind of relatively flawlessly each time. So, but yeah, nothing wrong with including it in the actual intro, I think, for the podcast. But the episode, no way. The episode intro needs to be custom, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Is it worth talking a wee bit about getting feedback on your podcast intros then? I mean, I guess one, I've not noted it down here, but we've got a handy feedback tool in the, is it 4-minute feedback tool? The Podcraft Academy.
Yep.
So that would be an option for the listener, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the ways people are using it. Actually, it's just to upload their first 4 minutes of their show, and we can help them out with length, music, structure, format, whether they're really inciting curiosity, they're really hooking people in, whether they're putting in a bit of a balance of personality and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you fancy that, you can get that over at our academy, which is over, well, you can find it at thepodcasthost.com/academy. And obviously it's just for members, but yeah, if you fancy joining up, there's plenty of other benefits in there too, alongside the 4-minute feedback. But yeah, how else do you think about getting feedback on your intros?
Yeah, one option, I always like digging into Apple Podcast Connect now and then. Like I always find it's a decent sample size of your listener profile. And particularly that episode analytic where you could see the drop-off and you could see the flat lines. And the flat lines in this case are a good thing. Not like medical flat lines. No. But I like if you're seeing a lot of people skipping your intro, then maybe it's just a sign that it's a wee bit repetitive. I don't know. I don't necessarily think there's a right or wrong answer here, but maybe if your intro goes too long, you'll notice that it's not getting a lot of listen.
It's a way to experiment, isn't it? Like try some super short intros and see what the first 1, 2, 3 minute drop off looks like. Try a couple with a bit of banter, see if that does help you lose a few people.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can definitely find out a lot of data from that. You can also, maybe even potentially some feedback, like if you do repurpose some of your shows to YouTube, the YouTube data is exactly the same too, in terms of drop off, listen time, all that kind of stuff. So you can get it there too. But Podcast Connect gives you.
I noticed that when you did the interview in the Creative Toolbox with Matty Lansdowne, when you did the YouTube version of it, I think you cut the intro to the podcast for the YouTube video.
Yeah.
Is that something you do all the time just because it's much more like, let's just get into it because it's video?
Yeah, it's actually a part of a technique around just segmenting episodes altogether. So taking a 45-minute podcast episode and picking out specific questions. So like with Matty, I think I took out his particular 10 minutes about how he's gone 500 episodes without missing a week. So it was around sustainability, it was around consistency, and I just took that part. And then we talked about a bunch of other topics. but I cut them into separate segments.
Right.
So Matty's YouTube one, that was specifically how this podcaster became consistent over 400 weeks or whatever it was. But then I'll use the other parts of the show as well for other questions that I ask them. So yeah, it's just, I think for video, it gets even more important to really go specific on the subject you're tackling, because it's much more a search engine as opposed to somebody just listening on subscription. So yeah, totally. But I think in YouTube even more so, it is important, those intros, because the drop-off's just far more brutal.
Yeah.
Like you lose people within the first 10, 15 seconds often there. So it's a bit nasty. But yeah, that's one method for sure. What about the method we're using, Matthew? Surveys.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Surveys, a good opportunity to get feedback on everything, including your intros. Whether you are specifically prompting a question on the intros or whether you're just leaving a general feedback, positive or negative, it's the opportunity for your listener to tell you anything they want about the show that might be on the intros. So yeah, a really good way to get it from the horse's mouth, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And if you fancy tell us if our intros are any good or not, you want us to improve anything about the show, what you'd like us to talk about more in future, please do pop over to our survey, which is thepodcasthost.com/survey. Obviously, 2 benefits for you if you do that. One is you can win a prize. So we do have a voucher we're going to give away to one lucky respondent. But also, it just helps make the show better. So if you are a loyal listener, we thank you very much. But also, we'd like to make it better for you, make it even more useful in future. So yeah, go over, fill out the survey, let us know what you think, and we'll make it better for you in future.
Maybe the feedback will be that we have to record here all the time. How long did it take you to drive here?
Hour and 45 minutes? No, over 2 actually. Yeah.
See, the dedication Colin goes to get Podcraft into your ears.
Exactly.
You could at least take our survey.
Yeah, please.
So do it now.
Please, thank you. Thank you for my my electricity spent getting here. Cool. All right. I think that'll cover it though, Matthew, eh?
Yeah. Aye. Lovely to get together again and these definitely different conditions, but yes. I've enjoyed your heated seats on my posterior. We sat in my car initially and Colin was a bit too soft just to sit on a normal chair, so we had to move.
Well, it's just comfort. It's comfort. It helps the warmth of the voice.
That's it.
When your ass is nice and warm.
Yeah,
the
definitely.
Warm voice as well. It also just makes you feel a little bit like you peed yourself.
It does a bit, actually. It really does. Before it goes cold.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you again for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Cheers.